Welcome to the 5 Journeys podcast, Live Like You Matter. I am beyond psyched for our guest today because it's Dr. Alessio Fasano. Before I introduce him, I will say I haven't ever told him this, but I have been a groupie for at least 10 years because I was doing research on something for a talk and stumbled on his paper on zonulins. I read it, and this is like 2010. And I said to my husband, this dude's going to get the Nobel Prize for this research. So I'm telling you now, this is our guest today. He is the director of the Center for Celiac Research and Treatment at Mass General Hospital for Children in Boston, Massachusetts. He's the author of Gluten Freedom, a book for general readers about celiac disease and gluten-related disorders, and co-author with Susie Flaherty of Gut Feelings, The Microbiome and Our Health, published in March 2021 by MIT Press. Welcome, Dr. Fasano.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
It's great to have you.
And I can verify Wendy is a true groupie. I can. If we weren't married, I'd be a little worried.
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, you're going to go see your boyfriend?" I'm like, "Yes, he's talking. He's talking." Not to put you on the spot.
That's right. No point in that.
So I want to talk about zonulins because literally when I read that paper, I was like, this is the root cause of autoimmune disease. This is why you get brain fog. This is why people get so sick. It's just fascinating to me. Like, how did you get into zonulins?
So, there are two ways that we can handle this question. The sanitary way, so I was smart enough to think about it, and I pursued that until I found it. Or the real story, there is always an act of serendipity. You try to do something and you stumble on something else. Which one you want to hear?
The real story. I was going to say, how'd you stumble on zonulins? But then I was like, I don't want to offend you if it was in fact a stumble. So, okay, tell us the real story.
So long time ago, I was very much interested to how microorganisms interact with us, how they can crosstalk, and what is the outcome of this interaction. At that time, we were looking at one microorganism at a time, not as we do now with this whole, ecosystem that we call the microbiome. Mm-hmm. And my interest was on cholera, believe it or not. Because, when I went to medical school and I was trying to find a niche to save the world, and I was thinking to get in research with cancer or something, my boss at that time that became my mentor said, you don't want to do that. You want to focus on diarrheal diseases. And I said, right? Diarrheal disease is not glamorous.
Are you shitting me?
That's right. You shitting me? And he said, that every year, this was again a while ago, 5 million kids die because of diarrhea. And that changed the prospect of the story. And, the following few years, I studied with him the physiology of the gastrointestinal tract. And again, in my naive kind of approach on life, I told him, I know everything about the host. Now I need to learn about the bug. Where should I go? And he said, well, I think that the best place is in United States, in Maryland, in Baltimore. The place is called Center for Vaccine Development. They do this kind of stuff on enteric pathogens, including cholera. You go there. And for the following 2 years, I was in Baltimore studying, this bug and ultimately to develop a vaccine. So in other words, something that eventually can be given to kids that will not die of cholera. And the approach taken was to take the bug and taking out the weapons that he used to make this purging diarrhea that make people dying with cholera because of dehydration. This was at the very beginning that molecular biology allowed us to cut and paste genes. So there was very cool stuff. And eventually I was put in charge in doing that on this bug. And after a fair amount of time and a lot of failures, I was able to develop this live attenuated vaccine that did not produce this huge purging of diarrhea in animal models because the bug did not have the weapon anymore. There was this very powerful toxins that is called cholera toxin. Time was ready for prime time, so that we had to give this to volunteers. Volunteers meaning medical students.
Obviously.
For a fair amount of money,
Wait. Alessio, did you give them cholera and then test the vaccine on them? Or like, how did you test that it worked?
Not exactly. The way they went was they were paid a huge amount of money, $500, to be locked in, because, of course, you don't want to spread cholera around, in a facility at University of Maryland. And you had 3 chances. 1, placebo, so water. So you will take $500 for nothing. 2, my vaccine that will work because I showed in animals that they were not sick. Or 3, the real deal, you shit your pants, but we would take care of you. 2 out of 3, though, was in your favor. So that was the premise. And we did the trial. It did not work. I mean, the placebo didn't get sick. The folks, that, got the real deal and up to 10 gallons of diarrhea, but we took care of them. The ones that they got the cholera vaccine had much less diarrhea, but still enough, a couple of gallons of diarrhea that made the vaccine not suitable. So bottom line, in 2 years, just flushed in the toilet, literally. So I got drunk for a couple of days and didn't show up in the lab.
Years, okay.
Very depressed. And then, again, typically what distinguishes, somebody that has the intellectual curiosity to do research, I went back to the blackboard and said, what went wrong? How come that, this vaccine did not work? End up to discover another toxin besides, the powerful one that I took out, by genetic engineering the vaccine, that rather than, purge water through the cell, as the typical toxin they do, they loosen up the space in between cells. So these gates that keep the cells tied together. There was a black box at that time because we little knew that this space was dynamic. There was just the beginning understanding that, you can even increase, opening of the space in between cells. And therefore, this toxin was a brand new category of toxin with a very different and peculiar mechanism of action. And I started to study the mechanism of action. I got more and more inside of what this key open these gates in between, cells do to reach the point in which, this toxin goes after a very sophisticated machinery of these cells. I can't believe that this machine is there just to be the target of a bug that makes us sick. Probably cholera has been smart enough to understand and exploit something that we do for other purposes ourselves. So that led me to think there must be a counterpart molecule that does this job for us to open and close these gates in between cells. And that's how we discovered, the first member of the Zonulin family.
That was in the brain, right? It wasn't in the gut, I think.
At the beginning, we discovered, in the brain, the receptor, and it was the brain first. But then, we discovered these families they are everywhere. They are in the gut, they are in the heart, they are in the brain, the kidney, and so on and so forth. And of course, in after the discovery, we start to ask what this molecule does for a living, why we have it. And we realize it's important for some physiological reasons, and as typically happen when you push physiology to the limits, you get into the disease, territory. And, we start asking, what kind of disease may have an issue in which you don't control the trafficking of the junk from the environment into your body that can eventually have, consequences. Of course, food allergies, chronic inflammation, they were on the list. But I was very much interested for personal reason in autoimmunity. And that's how I focused mainly on autoimmune disease, because that's also an issue in which we little knew, that beside the genetic predisposition and the exposure of something in the environment that makes you sick, there is also the need that this instigator needs to come in our body. And there was no port of entry that we're aware of. Mm-hmm. These are molecules that are very large. These are, in general, proteins that will instigate the immune system to mount an immune response against their own body and they cannot come through unless something goes wrong in these gates. And that's how the rest is history.
Cool. So I think we need to talk about what zonulins are before we go much further, because
so they are a family of proteins that they have the capability to open these very complex structures between one cell and another. We have this structure everywhere that, in other words, we have this on our skin for skin cells, but, the interface with the environment, like the gut, is covered by single layer cells, and they are not cement with each other as we believed before, but they have this connection and this very dynamic structure that you may consider as a sort of gates. They are always or almost always closed, and sometimes we open when we need to. Zonulin is the key to open these gates. It's supposed to open the gate and close that immediately after whatever you need to do is done. When it's stuck open for a long time, and this may happen because you're genetically predisposed to produce more zonulin or to maintain that too high in terms of the system, that is that you lose control of this trafficking, and now you open the flood and stuff comes in, and what comes downstream depends who you are genetically speaking.
Cool.
I mean, when I was deciphering this, so let me tell you my interpretation, and you tell me if I got it right, and correct me if I didn't. Okay, so you have zonulins, and if you are someone who, let's take hypothetically speaking, celiac disease, or you are genetically,
nobody in this room though,
maybe someone were in the talk, and you then have more receptors called CXCR3. Because you're genetically predisposed. And when you eat gluten, you upregulate the receptors. That upregulates the zonulins. You open your tight junctions, and here you are exposing the external world to your internal world. Like my internal thoughts that really should stay internal and not external. You're exposing the whole body to all of this because you're genetically predisposed to upregulate opening the tight junctions. Did I get that right?
You did. I tried to make this much simpler than you did, but yeah. I mean, of course, every single time that you have pathways that regulate any function, in this case, the permeability of the gut or the blood-brain barrier or the kidney, you have to have a molecule that instigates the pathway, and you have to have on the receiving end a receptor. So the receptor that the stimuli from the environment, and gluten is one of them, but also bacterial component, viral component, will instigate the release of zonulin is this CXCR3 receptor. So in other words, if you have something that instigates the release of zonulin, that can be many things, but let's say gluten fragment binds to this receptor, and this binding will instigate the release of zonulin. And the release of zonulin will then eventually start the chain of events that leads to the opening of these gates. Very complex.
I'm gonna interrupt and I apologize. For listeners, I need a dummy down version of why do we care?
Well, this is again very good question.
That's nice. All this.
It's very important because you're
language.
It's a very important question. We care because there was an inexplicable, epidemiological observation considering, chronic inflammatory disease in general, particularly autoimmune disease, that now we can explain based on these findings. For the past 3-4 decades, particularly for people that embrace Western lifestyle, we've seen this huge surge of non-infected chronic inflammatory diseases, cancer, autoimmune disease, food allergies, neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer or dementia. So in other words, and the timing for this puts a little bit in jeopardy the paradigm that we had until then. That was, if you're genetically predisposed to develop any of these diseases, and you will be exposed to the environmental trigger, whatever that will be, that are necessary and sufficient for you to switch from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome. Now, this acceleration, only 3-4 decades, made this paradigm not sustainable, not defendable. Let's go back to the example of celiac disease. 3-4 decades are not enough to have genetic mutation to explain the acceleration. The environmental trigger that we know being gluten for celiac disease did not change in 3-4 decades. Why this acceleration?
Well, hold on, Alessio, we have to explain to listeners, there's been an acceleration, isn't it? 4-fold. The incidence of celiac is 4-fold over what it was in World War II from the stored samples.
So this applies to all autoimmune disease, including celiac disease, doubling every 10, 15 years. And only for those that live in the Western Hemisphere. Clearly, there is something that has to do with the way that
the sun hits.
Well, again, we can cover that later if you want to. But anyhow, the point being that this acceleration can only be explained if there's something else other than these two factors, because that didn't change. And yet you have this doubling every 10, 15 years of celiac disease, of Crohn's disease, of asthma, of breast cancer, you name it. How you explain that? And again, the answer is that now the recipe is made at least by 5 ingredients. The 2 that we knew already, genetic and environmental trigger, but other 3. The third is indeed the loss of this barrier function. That's the reason why we need to care. So if the barrier works well, these 2 worlds, genes that live in our body and these instigators that, again, are large molecules, they're compartmentalized. They don't see each other. And therefore, you should not have any issue. But if you lose that barrier, like the fort, in the Old West, people that can come in, or, the wall around the castle, people will come in because you lost your protection there. So that is an element that seems to be important. The fourth being an immune system that becomes hyperbelligerent. After all, we're talking about chronic inflammation. The fifth, and probably one of the most impactful, is the change of this ecosystem, the microbiome, that has a lot to do to switch from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome.
I was convinced you were going to say toxins as the fifth thing, and I was all excited.
Well, actually, I was thinking,
toxins, it's a reductive issue. Toxins are part of the second element, that is the environment. But the last 3, they are very interconnected. So
how about changing epigenetics, though?
I'm coming.
Okay.
You're going to be patient.
If you have an increased gut permeability and therefore an increased antigen trafficking, the immune system will be facing more enemies that will become hyperbelligerent. And vice versa, if you have an hyperbelligerent pro-inflammatory status, some of the chemicals produced, i.e. cytokines, will increase your gut permeability. Mm-hmm. If you have the gut permeability, you put your microbiome off balance. And if you have dysbiosis, it's one of the strongest stimulus to release zonulin, therefore to make the intestine leak. So they're all interconnected. But the key element that you just mentioned is that the microbiome is able to influence if, when, why, and how our genes are put in motion. We co-evolve with the microbiome, they talk with each other, and epigenetically, the microbiome is the one that will make you to start the march from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome, because turning on and off genes that, eventually you do put in motion. That's the reason why you can develop celiac disease when you're 80 years old. You're born with these genes, you've been eating gluten for 79 years, you've been tolerating it. Why? Because the genes are necessary to break tolerance to gluten and not put in motion yet. Then epigenetically, this changes. The dysbiosis will increase zonulin and therefore the antigen trafficking. Genes controlling your immune system being turned on, gluten comes through, and that's it. And you develop the problem. If this is true, then that means that there must be, if we understand what we did wrong and that we're doing wrong in the Western Hemisphere, it must be a way to slow down, if not revert this phenomenon. And that's where we're going after.
So can you talk about the status of, did I get the name right, larazotide acetate?
Oh, hold on.
Wait. And by the way, don't ever call me belligerent. No, nothing's not to say to women. You're belligerent.
You just led us down the path. I want to go that path before we go.
Well, the end result of that path is that I could take a drug and maybe eat out and not be a hot mess.
No, I understand. But let's
go. Okay, fine. We'll walk deliberately down the path.
So what are the factors in Western Hemisphere that's different, and what can we do to reverse it? Let's go down that path first, because I want to know.
Sure. What we're doing wrong? Well, again, this is a work in progress, and if you got a chance to read Susie's and mine, book, everything is spelled out in there for what is the evidence. What we have been doing radically differently in the Western Hemisphere compared to the way that we used to live before, and the way that some population development countries are still living. Well, we used to be born mostly, exclusively, I should say, by vaginal delivery because we didn't have the C-section. We used to feed real food and not junk to our kids. There were few infections because, until the recent past, if you got an infection, you would die. Because, it was only recently that we developed antibiotics, vaccines, and so on and so forth, and COVID-19 dodged it. So see what happened. Even if we have these, weapons, you still pay a price, okay? So all this to say that this was the way that we evolved. For the past 2 million years, that was our evolution. There is a crucial time, the first 1,000 days of our lives from conception till 2 years of age, in which the immune system needs to be programmed to decide when to unleash inflammation. Remember, 2 million years ago, our ancestors average, life expectancy 13, 14 years, would die either because a dinosaur would eat you or you will die of infection. No time to develop autoimmunity or cardiovascular diseases or cancer. And therefore, inflammation is nothing else that create a very hostile environment for microorganisms to grow. It's too hot, there are chemicals that will kill you. The tissue will die, but the organism as a whole will survive. So a controlled inflammation that is unleashed when we are under attack is turned off when we have defeated the enemy. Is a good thing. We want it, okay? And if we have a microbiome that is in balance, because the main enemy is to create inflammation are microorganisms, that balanced microbiome that is engrafted the right way without derailment on its composition and function and so on and so forth, will program the immune system to put the bar for inflammation extremely high. Now, if you live in the Western Hemisphere, you're much more frequently born by C-section. You feed junk to your kids. You use and abuse of antibiotics, infection to the wazoo. This brings the microbiome off balance, and the programming of the immune system to unleash inflammation is such that the bar is very, very low. So you unleash inflammation for trivial, non-necessary reasons. And it's a matter of time that doing this over and over again on a specific genetic background will put you over the edge and switch from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome. Of all the elements that I told you, you're born once, you take antibiotics occasionally, you eat 3 times a day. Nutrition by far is the most impactful reason why we in the Western Hemisphere are paying a dear price in terms of chronic inflammatory diseases. That's my personal, I don't know if correct, but that's my personal reading of what's going on.
What fits the category for junk? Like where's the line? Is it all sugar? Is it anything processed? Not just gluten, right? Because you can eat crappy gluten-free food and it's still junk.
Well, it's also what are the foods sprayed with? Are you having a lot of glyphosate,
Back to toxins,
which is killing the microbiome by itself? Like what's your line then, Sand? We know what our line is, which is pretty high.
We're pretty far to the whichever side it is in terms of no crap. I don't know if is that left or right. I'm not really sure. We're just,
It doesn't matter. This is very factual. For 2 million years, we've been engineering a very sophisticated machine, a Ferrari, that will require high octane, gasoline in the tank. And we put that gasoline in the tank until the recent past. Now we put, water or Coca-Cola in there, and we wonder why the car is not performing. I mean, my generation, and therefore I remember, and I come from an humble family, so the poor diet was the only way that we knew how we were eating. A lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables, very cheap. You can grow by yourself, particularly in the blessing country like, Italy, where I was from. Legumes, olive oil, tubers, nuts, fish, because, we had a very, a rich fish, array possibility in the Mediterranean Sea. Meat, way too expensive. Maybe once every 2 weeks, if. That was the proportion of the gutter Sanders. Because like me, in the, ages in which I was growing in Italy, they had plenty of fruits and vegetables. They don't run. They are there. You just pick. You have to be a good hunter to get an animal. And if you do, it's once in a while.
Right.
So the food and the proportion has been completely reverted, who embrace the junk food lifestyle. So this is a long way to answer your question. It's not just to eat fast food, junk food. It's the proportion wrong. If you eat red meat every day, you will not be well. Because back to the microbiome, let me make another comparison here. Let's say the microbiome is a farm with different animals. And I developed my farm because it has to be mainly a dairy farm. So I want 1,000 cows, but also I want, pigs, horses, chicken, rabbits. I want them all. They eat different things. But again, I buy the food to sustain 1,000 cattle and 10, chicken, because I just need the eggs for myself. With the cows, I need to make the eventually the milk to be a dairy farm. Now I change the food chain supply because now I buy much more food for the chicken and not enough for the cows. What's going to happen? I have a surplus of eggs. I don't know what to do with that. And definitely I cannot be a dairy farm. That's what happened to us. By changing the diet and favoring some food, let's say red meat, you feed the part of the microbiome that is prone to create inflammation, because the microbiome itself may generate a macromilieu of inflammation. And you starving, the protective component of the microbiome, what we call the probiotics, because there's not enough food. What is the best probiotic, food for a good bacteria, for probiotics? So in other words, what is the best prebiotic? Fibers. And in the Western Hemisphere, particularly in the United States, the percentage of fiber intake is fourfold less below the minimum recommendation. So why wonder why we're in trouble? It's under our nose.
So has there been studies actually showing a significant reversal in terms of for the good if the diet changes? Has there been actually, in clinical practice, I can 1,000% say that, but has there been good scientific studies showing that reversal will change your microbiome and therefore your health status?
Yes, there are plenty of studies in animal, preclinical animal studies, plenty of evidence in preclinical animal studies. There are also evidence in some very well-controlled clinical studies done in humans. There is a problem, though. It's a cultural problem. And there is a social problem. And there is an economical problem.
Sure.
These are very difficult roadblocks to change the status quo. Let me elaborate on that. If my daughter has the idea that food is to go to the frozen section of a supermarket and take the trail and put it in the microwave for 5 minutes and that's dinner, that's a problem. If my culture is telling me the more obese, the better, because this means that you're healthy, that's a problem. If to eat the right way, the way that we discuss, being more expensive than eat junk food, and I am a single mother of 3 kids, and I have $5 a day to dedicate to food supply in my household, what do I buy? Fruits and vegetables that will not fill the belly of my kids, or the
pasta.
That's right. Or, that kind of sandwich from that chain that will eventually fill the belly of my kids. So you see how complicated is the story. Now, I give you an N equal 1 example because of this is all this. I'm not saying that this generation is lost, but it's going to be very difficult to do what you just proposed. Change the attitude of the people because it's culturally now embraced in these people. This is N equal 1, so I don't know what that means. My grandchild was born during the pandemic. My daughter and son-in-law were super busy, as we were, but my wife and I took over and said, we would take care of this kid while you guys keep doing what you're doing. And we fed this fellow the Mediterranean diet. He never saw a French fry. He never ate a fast food sandwich, and I'll leave that unnamed. What he ate was the real Mediterranean diet. This guy absolutely adored fruits, vegetables, to the wazoo. He has taste for it. He developed that kind of taste. Now he's 2.5. He doesn't know what this junk food is all about, nor is asking for it. Why? Because he does not have the taste for it. And when he will grow up and would become at the age that he starts to cook, by definition, he wants to cook that way because that's his taste. And when he's become a father, will eventually provide that kind of food to his kids. And the chain of events will change the status quo. I mean, if we don't do that and we want to impose, people say, so far you eat this way, from now on you have to eat this other way because otherwise you're going to die of cardiovascular, problems, and your life expectancy would be shorter. It's like to say somebody that is a smoker, you got to stop, because otherwise you'll have lung cancer. They know it, but stopping is very, very difficult because now it's entrenched in their, attitude of life.
And their friends and everybody else is doing it. So it's a cultural thing, like you said, and it
Same
continues.
as smoking. There was a social issue. There was peer pressure. Now, but, did we make a change to smoking? Big time. When I was growing up, 90% of people smoked. Now it's rare. So it can be done, but would take that cultural shift that I hope, will be a no-brainer given what we see that's happening here. This generation, for the first time, have a life expectancy lower than the previous generation.
Yeah.
And we can blame global warming and, unsettled situation that we're facing in the world, just ourselves. This doesn't come from external factors. These are the consequence of our poor choices, like we choose to go to war rather than settle reasonably differences, or that we decide that people that emigrate from Africa needs to die in the Mediterranean Sea rather than open up and make sure that they will have a shot, in Europe. These are choices that we make, or a wall between Mexico and United States. I don't want to be too political here, but the reality of the story is we can blame only ourselves for the consequences of an unsettled world that can live in much better shape if we make more savvy decisions, starting with nutrition.
So where on this, I mean, I think you nailed it when you said, obviously, if you're on $5 a day, these aren't the conversation, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of actualization, that when you're in survival, you're just focusing on safety and next meal. You are not focusing on optimal, you're focusing on survival. So you can't thrive until you get out of survival. So what you look
nothing. No, I mean, even I was just going to add, even with the $5 a day, I think if we had $5 a day, we could grow. We know how to grow vegetables. We can provide and think about that, but there's no culture of that.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're an immigrant, and I love gardening, so that goes well together. But yeah, obviously, if you live in a tenement and you have no outdoor space, that's not you're just not in that conversation. Right. It's a different one. So let's set the survival to the side. Even just getting through the day. I mean, we have 4 kids. They're all in a million directions. We cook every meal, and it's really hard. Like, it's hard.
Yeah, when it's hard, but I paraphrase my grandmother's saying that, so a good meal needs 20 minutes to be cooked. If it takes more, with the exception of a few things, that's not a good meal. I am a very busy man. My wife is a busy woman. We are not back home, or we don't have freedom to start cooking before 8:00 at night. But 8:30, food is on the table.
Wow.
And it's Mediterranean, good quality food. It's a matter to organize yourself.
Come on, Alessio. I'm going to take issue with this, because we feed like 9 to 10 people every night, and just making a salad takes a half hour for that many people. It's just, there's just a lot of food prep,
I take a counter argument to this. If there's 9 people that you feed and only one person that prepare, it will take half an hour. Yeah. But if all 9 will pitch in, nope.
It'll be faster.
Absolutely. You share. And it's a family matter. That's part of the cultural shift that you have to have. The kids cannot be just on the receiving end. They need to take ownership, because they will become parents at some point.
Right.
And they need to learn how to go shopping for the right, produce. If you have the possibility to have gardening experience, to plant your plant. Back to my grandchild, on my balcony, I don't have a land. I have a balcony with 2-3 pots. One has tomatoes, the other one has basil, and the third one has strawberries. Why? Because, he likes,
You like strawberries.
Strawberries. So we don't pick it. He picked it and eat directly from there. But it's the culture. And of course, we don't survive on these 3 pots, but it's the example of what the stuff comes from and what you can do if you put yourself together to be self-sustained. The $5 a day, in which, I live in Boston, and there are pots in Boston, like in the third world country, are in that kind of situation. And there are initiatives from very important foundations, like the Shah Foundation, with this project is called My Way Cafe, for example, to change the status quo. Mm-hmm. There are many schools in the intercity of Boston in which the cafeteria is made by microwave and packaged can come God knows from where that they put in there, and it's just disgusting just to look at. Mm-hmm. These people, they came in and school by school changed the cafeteria, invested $60,000 to do a buffet, buy a real kitchen and put somebody that will cook in there. And these kids now, they have fruits, vegetables, and cooked meal on real, meal. And it's the only meal that they have every day, because they don't have enough. Yep. Now, if indeed we will be able to implement, some of the obvious, policies that will make this affordable for everybody, even if they are not expensive, but, again, can be used wisely, that everything changes. Example, 1/3 of the produce that Walmart, Stop and Shop, Market Basket they have goes in trash because they reach the lifespan on the shelves, and 24 hours before they're rotten, they have to be pulled out and trashed. So you have to pay for this produce. You have to pay for somebody
pay for waste.
Pay for disposal.
Mm-hmm.
You take a fraction of the cost to do that. Take a truck and go to East Boston and deliver for free stuff that have another 24 hours life shelves to all these families. You pay less. You do PR for your company because you do a community service. Mm-hmm. And everybody will be happy. Now we have the initiative like the bread, basket initiative or the food bank initiative that partially they do that.
Yep.
But this big corporation that keep losing their money that way can reinvest their money. Again, no big deal. You give that for free.
Take a tax write-off.
Absolutely. Rather than to put this in a big can of garbage, put in a truck. Just deliver.
So I think you're highlighting there are a lot of layers that need to be addressed in order to circle back to my favorite topic of zonulins, which is keeping the gut healthy.
Because I believe that we departed from what we discussed by saying this is the common sense. Is this a society common sense? No. So this is a poor parlay. Why? If this was a society of common sense, we would not have, this weapons of mass destruction on the street and kill people. And we are still discussing if, this is self-defense, if we have a right. pistol that can shoot 25,000 bullets every second, or it's insanity.
Right. People are not, there is no common sense.
Solve this problem. We took for parlay.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the work that you're doing. Because we're not going to solve that one, but I think you make really good points. So are you allowed to talk? Can I go back to the medicine now? You're okay with that?
Go back now.
So does your wife bust your chops, by the way? Or does she just, you mentioned your wife. Is she going to bust your chops like I bust his chops?
What do you think?
Okay. And she's Italian?
I mean, yes.
Okay, she's going to bust your chops.
A general rule in any family who runs the show. Okay. I don't know, at least in my circle, of any family in which the man runs the show. If something to happen, it's not going to happen, period.
All right. So going back to what I was asking is, can you talk about the medicine? Because I never want to eat gluten, and it's gotten 95% better, but I'll still get a headache. I'll still have some brain fog. And my gut still reacts
with tiny amount of cross-contamination.
Oh yeah. Tiny cross-contamination. So can you talk about the medicine you're developing and when's it going to come to market? No pressure, Alessio, but I've really been waiting for years.
The medicine that you're alluding to, this larazodone, is an inhibitor of this zonulin. So in other words, it binds to the receptor and doesn't allow zonulin to signal to the cell to open these gates. And has been developed now for a while. It's now in a phase 3 trial for celiac disease. We end up to have the possibility to use the same molecule because, zonulin is involved also in the pathogenesis, some long COVID complications, particularly in kids, what we call the multi-organ inflammatory system or MIS-C syndrome, MIS-C, and now it's in phase 2 trial there. What this molecule does is stop this trafficking, for celiac disease of gluten, for MIS-C of this spike protein from COVID-19 from the gut into the bloodstream that causes the cytokine storm that makes this folks sick and so on and so forth. Drug development is a very long and inefficient route. Now we talk about phase 3 for celiac disease. The phase 3 is still ongoing, may fail anytime or may be successful anytime. So when you say how long it takes, I don't know. The only thing that I know, for the little that I've been involved, and I work in academia, but I helped to set up this company that now is non-existent anymore, that was in charge of this molecule, is when you bring this molecule from the doorsteps of science to clinical applicability, the success or failure depends not on the science anymore, but business choice, study design, how you cut corners so you do this right, economic crisis like we had in 2008, so there was no money to do any trials, a pandemic that makes recruiting impossible. So there are so many things that can derail, the process. So I cannot answer the question if and when this molecule will be on the market. But the idea is, indeed, as your beloved husband was saying, a safety net. So that you know that all the time, particularly when you're outside of your household, because at home you know what you're doing, there is a chance that somebody will not do the job right. Taking the pill that will allow you to have that peace of mind that you will be protected in case of cross-contamination, makes a world of difference for celiac disease, for which we know the trigger.
All the others.
Imagine all the autoimmune disease for which we don't know the trigger, so we don't have the option to take anything out. That will protect eventually, if it works, also for these autoimmune diseases, to have this trafficking of God knows what that makes these people sick.
What are the downsides, out of curiosity, for the drug? Any major?
The downsides is that you have to take this every single time that you eat, because there can be a good thing or a bad thing, because its action, it's like for 2-3 hours. Okay. And therefore, you have to take this often. But on the other hand, the fact that they're short-lived avoids, complication and blocking the system that must be there because we need it.
Right.
And acts in the gut, so it doesn't go systemically. So in general, the side effects are due to the presence of something that doesn't belong to your body in your bloodstream, and this doesn't go there. So these are the features at advantage. You have to take that for life, because there is it's not a cure. It's a treatment. So that's the other downside to this.
So when are we getting the CRISPR gene change to fix all the celiacs?
Hey, I don't know if genetic editing would be the solution, actually. Personally, if you're born with the genes, we talk about celiac disease, but we can talk about, again, anything else, Alzheimer's, breast cancer, and so on and so forth. The gene editing, it's such a difficult path to follow. But I believe that learning what kind of mistakes that made us to accelerate the incidence of this stuff will allow us to do what I believe will be much easier: prevention, primary prevention. Try to intercept that rather than fix when it's already broken. So we want to
don't do as I did.
The bottom line, my dream is to be the Jeff Philip of the situation, so that you come to me to change your oil rather than the mechanic of the situation because I am the mechanic now. You come when your engine is broken and I have to fix your engine. It's much more complicated. It's much more costly to do that. And in that sense, we have two big projects ongoing. That one is on celiac disease and the other one is on autism, to try to understand on a specific genetic background of risk, because these are neonates that they have somebody in the family with either disease. How come that some of these kids will eventually derail and develop celiac disease or autism, and others stay put and will not? And we do what we call now this multiomics. We look at their genes, we look at their microbiome, we look at their zonulins, we look at their proteomics, the metabolomic profiling, and trying to see any sign that will suggest me that they are making that turn that will lead to their final destination. That's the wrong one. And now we start to see that there are, particularly derailment in the microbiome, that epigenetically will make motion some genes that will influence gut permeability or permeability barriers, because, as I told you, dysbiosis will increase zonulin. That eventually will start their march from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome. And this requires a huge amount of data that needs to be modeled through artificial intelligence to do prediction model, so that if I know that when they shift the microbiome in a certain way, and the model is telling me that because of that, in 10 years, her chance to develop Alzheimer is 75%, I have a way to bring her back and say, I changed the microbiome, so I epigenetically turn off what has been turned on, and this is not going to happen. Prevention, again, is much cheaper than treatment. And by the way, because the goal is quality of life and containing the healthcare expenses, it's a win-win situation for everybody, for the patients, for the health insurance, for who cares about our population in terms of political, social issues and so on.
Mm-hmm. All right. That's a pretty tall building to climb, but I think we're up for it.
As you're talking, one thing that I realized that we diagnose dysbiosis all the time. When you were talking, I'm thinking scientifically, is there a clear cross point where what makes it, I don't know, what makes a good microbiome and what makes it dysbiotic? Like, is there like a line in the sand that says, what is that? Because scientifically you have to define that.
That's right. This is really the crossroad where the entire scientific, community is.
Way to go, Ed.
I believe that finally we're at the verge of transformational changes. And before that I go there, I have a question for you both. What is the normal length of hair, or the normal color or eyes?
Right.
Is such a thing?
No.
There is no such thing as the
spectrum.
normal healthy microbiome. There is no such a thing. And what we did so far is said, take our tree microbiome, that will be different. Mine will be different today from tomorrow. So it's a moving target. And then, we statistics say, well, maybe rather than 3, we analyze 300, we will find the normal microbiome. We did not find anything. They said, well, let's go 3,000. Now we're at the million people to find the microbiome. So I have to define, first of all, healthy individuals, and the definition of healthy is already challenging. I need to find 1 million of them. And then eventually, I know already that it's going to be 1 million different microbiomes. There is no such a thing. What is important is to appreciate the symbiotic relationship between the host and this ecosystem. We genetically are all different. Even identical twins are different because epigenetically they have genes that they function differently. If indeed the symbiotic relationship has to be personalized, the corollary is that we all have a different microbiome. What is not changing between me, you, Wendy, you, is the outcome of this interplay. The metabolic pathways, they are controlled by this. We all need to have blood pressure at certain limits. We all need to have glucose level in our blood at certain limits. That is achieved thanks to this interaction between these two worlds. They are very different from each other, but the outcome is standard. That will define a human being. So as we all have one nose, 2 eyes, and 2 legs, we all have to have a metabolic pathway that works in a certain way. And that's achieved, that this perfect symbiotic relationship between these two, genome and microbiome. You change one, the microbiome, you can influence the other epigenetically, and the outcome is that you switch from being healthy to have a disease.
Yep. I love that. And it leads to so many profound
processing. It's like,
what you're saying is, quote unquote, healthy microbiome can only be defined by how is the person healthy or not, because the signals in the end will be the same, but the actual composition of the microbiome varies wildly depending on the microbiome and the genetics and the interactions.
So I see this as a future. your office, for example. Somebody goes to Wendy's office, and that would be me. I give her my genomic chip that I have on my chain here. She looks into the computer with 23,000 genes, and she will eventually receive also the stool samples that I brought with me because she told me to do so. And she's going to put in the back of her office in the machine that would analyze the microbiome while we talk. And, we'll also do some epigenetic analysis. And by the time that she finishes her physical exam on me, she has all this data in the computer that is now comparing this data to gazillions of similar data that model what will be the outcome when all these pieces they come together. And she would tell me, yeah, Alessio, you are fine. You will live healthy until age 72.5, after which you have 92% chance to develop, Parkinson. And we need to change this by manipulating what I can, that is your microbiome. And this is what you need to do. Come back in 6 months and let's see if we made this happening. I come back in 6 months, we go through the same routine. She do the modeling and say, oh, that risk for 92% now is 5%. I think that's stay put there. And she can give me probiotics, symbiotics, prebiotics, a diet, because I'm pretty sure that the future is most of the diseases can be handled with the diet because of what I'm telling you, that the microbiome is so influential for so many reasons why we develop diseases that, as we derail by changing the microbiome, we can bring this back. And when I say microbiome, I intend, the zonulin, the antigen traffic, and all 9 yards, because they all influence each other, as I was telling you before. It would be much better to do that way.
Yeah. I mean, that requires quantum computing, my guess.
Well, Genova Diagnostics is doing that now on the stool samples. It's a report that drives me nuts. And we said to them, this report drives us nuts. It drives the patients nuts. Put it towards the end, because people would get stuck on people with your similar microbiome often have these different things. It's still there, where they go the up and the down. It's so hard to look at.
The Genova principle it's correct. It's not mature, though, for prime time news. Because we don't have all this data. We don't have that mathematical modeling that's been building. That's what we're doing now. But we have to, before running, you need to learn walking. And before walking, you need to learn crawling. We're barely sitting and not standing yet.
I don't even think we're pushing up. We're flat. Exactly. We're flat. Just try to turn your head to the side.
Exactly right. But we will be able to at some point. So, but, again, of course, there are some, I'm not saying this is the Genova's case, but there are some companies that are trying to really exploit the potentials running while we don't know how to run yet. And we may take misstep, so to speak. And again, because I know what kind of healthcare business you guys involved, ultimately, our goal as a healthcare professional is to improve the quality of life of people. That's what it is. No more, no less, no matter what it takes. And, for me, when I got to push back and said, geez, you're saying that we're, doing so many things wrong right now, but, life expectancy now is 80 years. It's not 14 years like it was, 2 million years ago. And that's true. But how we achieve their goals, major milestones. We were spending 95% for food procurement and 5% of procreation. That's what we were doing 2 million years ago. When we, with the advent of agriculture, domesticated food and crops, there was a major milestone 10,000 years ago. Now we free up time to build the Eiffel Tower, the Colosseum, because now we can unleash the creativity. We have more time. But, when we reach the point in which you ask yourself, it's better to live up to 60, but self-sufficient and healthy, or up to 80, but on a wheelchair with the tube of your nose and, pull-ups because you shit your pants.
Quality over quantity.
Well, it's health span versus lifespan.
Yeah. That's right. I believe that both can be achieved if we make the right choices that are not that hard to, put on a piece of paper, but extremely hard to implement. To go back to the zonulins, For example,
my friends.
Longevity.
Yeah.
It's mostly related to a state of inflammation. As a matter of fact, this is called inflammaging. All our cells in our body, they are destroyed and, resupplied with new cells, with a few exceptions. When we start to have an increased destruction and not the capability to resupply, that's when we tilt at the point of no return, and we start that process of aging that will bring us down to a point of no return, and we die, unless again an intervening disease will speed up the process. If you look at ultracentenarian, their level of zonulin is extremely low compared to people in the 40s or the 50s with cardiovascular diseases. If you take the fruit fly and you
Drosophila.
And you try to predict when they die, the stronger predictors is when their intestines start to leak.
Mm.
That is the biological clock that said the fruit fly is going to die within a certain period of time. They found the mechanism why they start losing that barrier, meaning stuff comes in, there's much more inflammation, I don't keep up with repair, and I die. They've stopped that genetically, and by doing that, they double the life expectancy of the Drosophila. It's like the right 80 years, you live 160 years. And all this is associated to change the microbiome and so on and so forth.
Are you going to talk about this at the A4M Longevity Conference in December?
Maybe.
This is the talk, right?
Yep.
I'm talking on telomeres and mitochondria, triad of interdependence. But you need to talk about zonulins.
Yeah. Well,
the doorway to longevity.
That's your and the guts and the
telomeres is not a fascinating story there. And I don't have to teach you that. If you're lucky enough to be born with long telomeres, you will have a longer life expectancy because they tend to get shorter and shorter over time. And the rhythm of that gets shorter is all depends on your lifestyle. Genetically, again, you can born with, if you have a family ultracentenarian, you have long telomeres that protected the DNA from damage. That's what they do for a living, and therefore the process of aging. And if you're born by people that have a lower life expectancy, they're a little bit shorter. But even if I got the short telomere to start with, and I have a good lifestyle, that process of getting shorter is much slower if I don't have a very healthy lifestyle. And what we're talking about accelerates, telomere shortening, infections, inflammations,
food,
dysbiosis,
gut barrier.
Zonulins.
Absolutely.
It all ties in. I unfortunately, we got to actually.
I could legit chat with you all day. See, I told you this is why I'm raving about him. So, okay.
So ready, 120. Yeah,
I know. So, Alessio, we'll put everything in the show notes. Is there something in particular you want people to follow you on or find you, or like both books? Like, what do you want to tell people? And as we sort of close down,
I think that again, most of the stuff that we discuss is in the book that Susan and I put together. There was a work of love and sweat and pain, because we're writing on the microbiome when you write a chapter and then you move to the next, and the previous chapter are already obsolete because the literature
just keeps going.
I've never seen anything like this. It's still hot. 700 papers a day comes out.
Wow.
I don't have any comparison to any other field in the past. Wow. And that, again, we try to really put some fundamental pillars that would not change in the discussion there, so that the book will not become obsolete. As a matter of fact, we finished the book, wrapped up, given to the editor, that COVID came, so we have to write that part. I mean, that was yeah. But anyway,
so go read the book. Go get the book. Gut Feelings: The Microbiome and Our Health.
A good resource to rationalize why you need to do some changes or lifestyle choices capable to make full use of your potential of whatever Mother Nature gave you genetically, and play your cards, genetic cards, well, so that you can win the big game no matter what.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Me?
You.
Dr. Fasano, thank you for joining us for another episode of the 5 Journeys podcast, Live Like You Matter. If this made a difference for you, pay it forward. Write a 5-star review so other people can discover it, and tell your friends. Have a great day.